thank you all for coming to our new semester of CAC presentations, and I want to thank you, Ike, for taking the time to put this together for us. And you know everyone here, I believe. Hi, come on. You know everyone already, right?
Sure.
Oh, John, you've met. And Ike is the director of the Mozart Montgomery Orchestra and professor of music, and recently received an appointment to be conductor at the Opera in the Heights. It's a great compliment to you, to the music department, and to the college. So congratulations. And with that, Ike's talk today is on La Clemenza de Tito, Mozart's Strangest.
Okay, thank you for having me. Yes, I received a call just about a month ago from Opera in the Heights asking me to fill in to conduct La Clemenza di Tito. And when I got the call, I was extremely excited for the opportunity, but at the same time, this was an opera that I knew nothing about. Mozart is known for his operas, but he's not known for this opera. And the more I looked into it, the more fascinated I became. And I chose the title Mozart's Strangest Opera to provoke and hope that it might generate interest. I don't know that it's necessarily his strangest, that's probably hyperbolic, but it's definitely, I think, his most misunderstood opera. And so I'd like to illuminate certain points. Begin with a couple general notes about Mozart. As you may know, Mozart excelled in every compositional genre, symphonies, concertos, solo instrumental works, choral works, and arguably his most lasting legacy, maybe his innovations in opera. Just as a whole, are you familiar with works such as Marriage of Figaro, maybe by name only, Don Giovanni, maybe Magic Flute? These three works they were written all within the span of about 7 years, towards the end of Mozart's short life, but they ring still very, very fresh to modern audiences, and indeed they're very popular still today. And there was a study conducted a few years ago surveying over 700 opera houses throughout the world. And these three operas ranked in the top 10 of most performed. So it's very much relevant to modern audiences. Magic Flute happens to be opening this weekend, and we'll be playing for 2 weekends at the Houston Grand Opera. And concurrently, Opera in the Heights will be opening this weekend and running for the very same 2 weekends. And what's very interesting about this, at least to me, is that both operas were written at the same time. Mozart was working on Magic Flute in 1791, and he took a brief hiatus from it to take on a commission to write La Clemenza di Tito. It is rumored that he might have written it in the span of only 18 days, and then went back to complete Magic Flute. And so there is some scholarly contention about which opera was his last stage work. But what I found is that Clemenza di Tito was most likely his second to last opera. Just a few more details about the composition history. It was premiered in Prague September 6, 1791. This is just under 2 months before Mozart died. He died December 5th that year. So not necessarily a swan song, but close to it. It was written to celebrate the coronation of the new Holy Roman Emperor, Leopold II, who was being crowned as King of Bohemia. And as I said, rumor has it that it was written in a very short amount of time. And he began it, completed it while working on Magic Flute. The reception was mostly negative. Empress Maria Luisa the spouse of the new Holy Roman Emperor, was there at the premiere and said that music was very bad, and nearly all of us slept through it. Charles Rosen is a very important musicologist who literally wrote the book on classical style, and what he had to say about it was extremely unmemorable. And Franzi Niemeczek is Mozart's first biographer, and he makes a very strong statement in defense of it, saying that that connoisseurs are in doubt whether Titus, as it is sometimes called, but more formally, Clemenza di Tito, does not in fact surpass Don Giovanni. And so it has its supporters, to be sure. Now, why was it so negatively received? It probably has to do with the fact that it was viewed as extremely old-fashioned for the time, even for Mozart's time. Mozart, as you know, famous for Marriage of Figaro, Don Giovanni, Magic Flute, all very progressive works that Mozart established certain new conventions within. Writing trios, quartets, quintets, these were new innovations that Mozart had put into place. And Clemenza di Tito is based on not only a historical plot, and draws upon certain opera seria traditions. Opera seria is a term used for serious opera, which was the mainstream for the early part of the 18th century, and it's associated with some very strict formal conventions. This was thought of as a big step back. And not only that, but the plot was thought of as very cliched. It was certainly appropriate for the occasion, for a coronation piece, to have a piece that glorifies a ruler, as it does. It's based on the life of a real life Roman emperor, Titus, who was betrayed and was able to uncover an assassination plot that was being executed by his best friend and also Vitellia, whom he had planned to marry. But in the end, he decides to forgive everybody because he is so merciful and clement, and everybody sings his praises at the end. And this libretto was very popular in the early part of the 18th century. 40 different composers had taken it on and said it. And so by the time Mozart got to it, it felt like old news. And besides, Mozart had already established himself as a master of opera buffa, which seemed to be pointing to the future of opera. Opera buffa, a term for comic opera, and was very much in vogue, whereas opera seria was going out of style. So what are the opera seria conventions? It comes down to two elements generally. There is a great deal of what's called secco recitative. This is dialogue that is sung in a way that resembles speech, not so much aria-like, not a display of one's voice, but much more akin to speech, and the role is to move the plot along. And in opera seria, much of the piece is taken up with this sort of music. And typically it is not accompanied by the entire orchestra, but just with a small group of players, maybe just one keyboard player or a player of plucked instruments, sometimes joined by a low string instrument. In any case, accompanied very sparsely. And then these secco recitatives alternate with what's called da capo aria being the most songful parts of the opera, the most memorable parts of the opera. And these arias always had a conventional form. Da capo in Italian literally means from the head. And it refers to the fact that in these arias there is a first section which feels like a complete section of music. There's some kind of contrasting section. If the first part is slow, maybe the contrasting B section would be fast music. And then they go back And oftentimes composers, actually I would say almost always composers did not bother to write out the return of the A section. Instead, at the end of the B section, they would just say da capo, go back to the beginning. And it was left to the performer to make the return somehow interesting, whether it was ornamenting the melody, showing off his or her voice. In any case, the burden of making the return somehow compelling was entirely up to the performer. And occasionally, this alternation between the spoken / sung dialogue and these da capo arias was broken up, if you were lucky, with something different, such as an accompanied recitative, which is a more dramatic version of the cyclo recitative, where it's accompanied by the string section of the orchestra, or sometimes the entire orchestra. And then oftentimes these pieces would have to have some kind of rousing finale, so it would be given a chorus oftentimes. And Handel was known for excelling within these conventions. Handel wrote about 40 operas, many of them very successful in England, and they all followed this type of structure, mostly secco recitative and da capo aria. And where Mozart fits in with that, well, before I get into that, let's just give you a sense of what all this sounds like. This is one of Handel's better known arias from another opera that has to do with a Roman emperor. And this begins with a little short secco recitative. You'll notice that it's accompanied by lute, a complex string instrument, and very sparsely accompanied. It is sung, but you'll notice that every syllable gets only one note, rather than having a florid passage of notes on a single syllable like you might in a flashy aria. These are much more speech-like. And then it will move seamlessly into the aria, which is slow. I'll jump ahead to the fast section of the aria, and then we'll go back to the capo, when the singer will take some liberties to make the return somehow different. This is how opera seria works. Oh no, hold on 1 second. We're almost there. Okay. That was not Handel.
That was involved.
Secco recit. Here's the aria. Goes on this way. I'm going to skip to the end of the A section. Followed by contrasting B section. That's the B section, and now take us back to the capo, the return to the beginning. Here we are. You'll notice that she's no longer singing the notes on the page, but ornamenting the melody that Haydn had provided. The orchestra, however, continues exactly as printed, unless the conductor has somehow intervened to do otherwise. So, I think you get the idea that ABA, a complete section of music, contrasting, and then the return of the A with ornaments. And Clemenza di Tito is one of these opera serias. And the question is, what makes it Mozart, and what makes it unique to Mozart in his final year, 1791? And there's a lot there, and it is not the old-fashioned throwback that it is so often labeled as. Here's some of the features that you can expect from it. Well, first of all, the libretto that was over 60 years old by the time Mozart had gotten to it was in need of some revision. And with Mozart's specifications, the 3-act opera was streamlined into 2, and so a lot of that speech-like music was cut. It was too slow for contemporary sensibilities. And also, in lieu of da capo arias, which are inherently repetitive because the A section repeats each time, I'll get to that in a moment. There's instead an emphasis on ensemble numbers, duets, trios, especially at finales, at the ends of acts. Mozart likes to incorporate really large ensembles like a quintet or a sextet plus chorus. And he does so with both acts in this piece, which is slightly unusual to end a first act with a chorus. And this quotation in Italian is something that Mozart had written into his catalog of his own works to describe La Clemenza di Tito. He said that La Clemenza di Tito was made into a true opera, vera opera, by Signore Mazzola, who was the one who revised the libretto. And so implied in that is that until they had made the librettos, it was not true opera. It was some kind of historical piece, and not opera as Mozart had defined it himself. Now, in these ensemble numbers, this is Mozart's genius. He is credited with being the great psychologist of opera. He always strove to convey psychology, the emotional state of each character as they interact with others. And I'll be very glad to show you some examples towards the end of this presentation. Another feature of this piece is that the clarinet is extremely prominently featured in the piece. Clarinet was one of Mozart's favorite instruments, especially at the end of his life. At the time, it was still a rather new instrument, and he wrote a clarinet concerto for the greatest Viennese virtuoso of that instrument that same year, 1791. And there are 2 arias that have secondary solo parts for the clarinet, which are extremely possible. It's very unique to this piece and unique to 1791. And then the role of the chorus being greater than any of his other operas. This probably has to do with the fact that Mozart was already at work on his commission for the Requiem, and choral works were very much forefront in his mind. And there is a great deal of music here that is reminiscent of the Requiem, or you could say foreshadows the Requiem. And he does write da capo arias, but rather than relying on the performer solely to generate new musical interest on the repeats, he took the initiative to write out the repeat himself and create harmonic variation, alter the melody himself, and ultimately take it somewhere else. Not just for music's sake, but I think to to underscore the psychology of the character as it develops over the course of the aria. Okay, at this point, we're going to get into some musical examples, and just to help us appreciate it, I think it'd be good to go over the plot of Clemenza di Tito. I'm going to turn on the lights again. Do you think will everyone be able to see if I jot down some notes over here? Okay. So the lead character, although there is some debate about this, but the piece has the name Tito in it. And Tito is the Roman emperor, and he just recently got the job. Before him, his predecessor was the deposed former emperor Vitellius, who has a daughter named Vitellia. Vitellia, daughter of former emperor. And she feels naturally that she should be Tito's new empress, and is fully expecting to be selected to be his bride. But this does not happen because Tito is in love with somebody else. He is in love with a Jewish queen, Berenice, and he decides ultimately that he cannot marry her because there is so much pressure to marry a Roman girl instead. And but Vitellia doesn't know this. She still feels very jilted and is very enraged. Tito then talks to his best buddy, Sesto. Friend of Tito. And Tito asks Sesto for Sesto's sister's hand in marriage. Sesto's sister's name is Servilia. And Vitellia becomes even more enraged, saying, do I have to be the last woman in Rome for you to acknowledge me as a suitable bride? And it is at this point that Vitellia decides Tito has to go. He decides to plot his assassination. And he solicits the help of none other than Sesto. Sesto is head over heels in love with Vitellia. So I'm going to draw a little arrow, a little heart. Very much in love with Vitellia. Vitellia is probably somewhat in love with Tito, but also wants to kill him. So I don't know how to heart/skull. I don't know. Wants to kill Tito. Let's see. So Sesto feels very conflicted, of course, when Vitellia commands him to assassinate Tito, because he is so lovesick and doesn't know how to say no. But he is best friends with Tito. Ultimately, he does decide to go through with the plot. And let's get into the duet when Vitellia is trying to convince Sesto to whack Tito. Just like to point out a few musical aspects from the score before we listen. I said before that Mozart was a master of writing for ensembles and opera. And you'll see that Sesto musically is immediately set up as a noble character, a very idealistic character, with these rather regal rhythmic figures. Ba-dum, 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 gives this kind of majestic feeling about him, and sets him apart as a very noble character. And then when Vitellia enters, oh, by the way, he is saying, tell me what to do, you are my destiny, I'll do anything for you. Vitellia then comes in. The orchestra texture changes completely. There are a lot of fast, repeated notes in the strings. And And then she goes on to say, before sunset, I want him dead. I want Titus dead. And the music is extremely agitated. Sesto's music becomes increasingly agitated as Italia gets inside his head. And ultimately, by the end of the duet, they are singing in unison and in harmony to signify that Sesto has been convinced. So let's have a listen. Let's have a viewing, rather. Hopefully there won't be another ad for whatever it was then. So this is a rather recent production, I believe 2011, at the Metropolitan Opera. This is the very scene. Oh, I think I need to, this way. That's not it, I'm sorry. Here we are. I neglected to mention that.
Yeah. Something big here.
Neglected to mention that Sesto is a so-called pants role, which is to say that is a male character played by a female singer, usually of a somewhat lower range, mezzo-soprano, whereas Italia is a very high soprano, but also happens to have some very low notes, which is very unique to this piece. Otherwise, let's see, voice types. Servilia is a young, nice Roman girl. She's a soprano. Tito, the heroic emperor, is a tenor appropriately. Okay.
Was this because this was prior a castrati?
Yes, Sesto was premiered, the role of Sesto was premiered by castrato. But that practice, well, does everybody know what a castrato is? It's the, yeah, okay, this is very awkward, but in the up to the mid 18th century, extremely talented superstar boy sopranos who had a promising career ahead of them would sometimes perform an operation on themselves to maintain their high voices. And when one does so, the rest of their body matures, and so you have this extremely high soprano-like voice, but with a certain masculine feature, very unique timbre, and it was very prized, but ultimately it went out of style because it was ultimately viewed as somewhat inhumane. Sesto these days is performed by female mezzo-sopranos. Okay, let's carry on.
There's psychology.
Sorry about that. So first, this is the second recitative that leads directly into the duet. romantic sentiment from Sesto. So they have the same music and the same text even. They both say 1,000 different emotions wage war on me. No soul is more tortured than mine. And they both have reasons to share these sentiments, but for different reasons. Vitellia has 1,000 emotions warring on her because she is commanding someone to kill someone that she probably loves. Sesto has agreed to kill his best friend. And so both of them feel that no soul is more tortured than theirs. But the fact that they are on the same page, they are now conspirators, is being represented musically. That's Mozart's genius right there. Let's go back. Present. Now, at a certain point, Tito's plans to marry Sesto's sister, Servilia, has to go change because Servilia tells Tito that I'm actually in love with someone else, I have to come clean. She actually turns down the emperor. and Tito, being the extremely merciful, wonderful guy that he is, says, I don't want him to get in between the two of you. I'll find someone else. You know what? I'll marry Vitellia. Vitellia does not yet know that he has made the decision. Sesto does not know he has made the decision either. But Sesto is extremely tortured by his task, and he has just decided, okay, I really will do it. But once this is all done, please let us come together in peace, you and I, Vitellia, and have a life together. And this is the aria in which the clarinet is featured extremely prominently, and was in fact written to be played by Anton Stadler, the same clarinetist for whom he wrote his clarinet concerto that same year. This is Sesto again. He's a real love fool, isn't he? He's how many times have we heard him say, "I'll do whatever you want"? And Vitellia is extremely good at manipulating Sesto. This structure of the aria of having the singer alternate melodies with a featured instrument is actually a nod to a Baroque practice. It's called an obbligato instrument, which is a term used to describe a secondary solo part that's given to an instrument. And it's a nod to the cantatas of composers like Bach and Handel, except it is ultimately a hybrid of an old model with new techniques, new instruments. You would never have had a clarinet obbligato by Bach or Handel. It would more likely have been oboe or a trumpet, and Mozart using the instruments that are available to him in his time, but still paying homage to older practices. Next up, I'll introduce another character. This is a trio, much later in the opera. Sesto has already carried out his plot. His job was to assassinate Tito when the signal was given. The signal was the Capitol building lit ablaze, and the first act ends with the Capitol building on fire and Roman people all mourning what they think is the loss of their emperor. It turns out the Emperor Tito does survive the fire and was not, in fact, killed by Sesto. Sesto thought he had seen Tito stabbed to death, but it was somebody else actually. It was a co-conspirator. In any case, Sesto's involvement in the assassination is exposed, and he is arrested by Publio, who is a prefect of the Praetorian Guard, and he comes to apprehend him. And Vitellia is extremely tortured, knowing that this was all her doing, and she is not going to speak up. She's not going to speak on behalf of Sesto, not yet anyway. And Sesto, of course, feels extremely betrayed and isolated. And these feelings, again, conveyed musically. Each character has their own music. I think I should show you before we play. 1 second, please. Document the camera. Yes. Terzetto, trio. This begins with a duet between oboe, I don't know if you can see, but it's a little OB and then FG, fagotto, bassoon. Two wind instruments playing together, and it's no coincidence. Sesto sings, "If on your face you ever feel soft air wafting, it is the last of my sighs that breathe it will be." And so he's talking about sighs and soft air wafting. Mozart appropriately sets that music using woodwind instruments. And again, Vitellia's music, extremely agitated, repeated notes in the strings, very strong accents. Here she says, "For me, he's dragged to his death. Oh, wherever shall I hide? And soon the world will know my transgressions." So rather than, she does pay some mind to the fact that someone who loves her dearly is being the fall guy for her plot, but she's actually more concerned about her own neck. Meanwhile, Publio, who has showed up to arrest Sesto, has very short phrases, just saying over and over again, "Vieni, come to prison." Each time he repeats it. Very short, very authoritative. The music becomes very accented, short, aggressive sounding. In the next section, Sesto, again, the hopeless romantic, says, "Remember that I love you in this state forever. For my reward, at the very least, let me have your pity." And he means Vitellia's pity. So this is a guy who is hopelessly lovesick. Vitalia responds by saying, "They lacerate my heart, remorse, horror, fright." And her music becomes, again, very agitated with these dotted rhythms. Publio's music, which was very harsh and forceful, now becomes very gentle. As his sentiments change, he sees the scene and observes the harsh, bitter tears in her eyes that rain moves my soul. And his music becomes increasingly sentimental. But ultimately, they have to move on with the task of arresting Sesto. Publio once again returns, Vieni, and to Vitalia Sesto, their music converges, saying, how cruel, as they share what they think is their last moments together. Here it is.
Ardelbecco, ove stare? Io non ho mente per distinguere consigli. Sesto, oggi conservo la tua vita e il mio amor. Tu sei perduto, sei quel che scopre, e se...
This was supposed to start at the beginning of the trio part.
Minore tenerezza perché? Al fin tiranna.
Sesto partir conviene.
Yes, Publio.
E terra
It's
col
arrest
conferro
Sesto.
verti il senato. E non posso io di ferirmi con molti.
Grata a Deo.
And Vitalia's agitated music. Okay, I'm gonna move it along because there's just two more scenes that I'd like to introduce. I mentioned that Mozart wrote da capo arias for this piece as a tribute to the opera seria model, and so there will be an A section. There will be a contrasting B section, but the A will not be just a simple repeat with ornaments. It will be a composed further development of the music that we heard prior. in this scene, Servilia, Sesto's sister, is trying to convince Vitellia to intercede and fess up, and saying that your pity and tears that you shed for Sesto without action is nothing more than just cruelty. And try to get a sense of how the melody works out in the first A section, and then I'll skip ahead to the second A section when it is further insistent and more, what should I say? Well, I'll let you decide. For me, it's extremely powerful and it's pleading. Let's have listen to Servilia's aria. That's the A section. This is the B section. This is the return of the A section, which is longer and harmonically much more complex. Just when you think it's done, Mozart continues the same phrase, just this insistence. All of your weeping, all of your weeping, all of your weeping is useless. She inserts that very high, beautiful, floaty line and repeats it as well. So that's the capo aria in the style of Mozart. Just like to review some of the points I tried to make about what makes this piece strange, what makes it unique. Well, for one thing, it is a master of comic opera, taking on serious opera, which was already outdated by the time he decided to take it on at the end of his life. And it blends Syriac conventions, the capo aria and secco recitative, but instead, in lieu of da capo arias that rely solely on ornaments, he brings more to the table harmonically, orchestrationally, and instead of secco recit, he places an emphasis on ensembles and accompany recits where the dialogue is accompanied by the entire orchestra. Another strange aspect of this is that because he had to write the piece in 18 days, or so is believed, he delegated or outsourced the task of writing these secco recitatives to one of his students. And it's believed to be none other than Franz Xaver Süssmayr, who is perform version of his Requiem, which Mozart was not able to finish in his lifetime. And my cast is constantly complaining how awkward the secco recitative is to sing, and to them it's extremely obvious that it was not written by Mozart. That's just why I didn't have the facility with the Italian language that Mozart did. Another strange thing about this piece is, unlike just about any opera out there, where the end of Act One is a rousing finale where all the characters rush to the stage, the music becomes faster, more agitated. In this piece, the music dies down, becomes extremely mournful as the Romans view the Capitol building burning, imagining that their emperor has died. And this music very much looks ahead to the Mozart Requiem. And with just a few minutes, I'd like to give you a sense of this. The very beginning of the Act One finale sounds an awful lot like what I think of the Dies Irae section, the Day of Wrath portion of the Requiem. And the very end, to me, reminds me of the Lacrimosa section of the Requiem. This is Vitellia looking for Francesca. Where is he? That's obviously a modernized. Then I'll jump ahead to the end of the first act. That's Sesto there. Being masculine with strategic mustache. Tito, Day of Sorrow. Very unusual way to end the first act of an opera, especially coming from Mozart. Okay, that is all I have for you. I have about 5 minutes to take some questions you might have about the piece. Any questions you might have about this particular production that opens this weekend. Happy to take questions.
Why do you think you were asked to conduct a strange opera? Your word.
Oh.
I mean,
Well, I think that I don't know why the previous artistic director decided to program this. My guess is that he did so knowing that Magic Flute would be running at the same time, and I think he wanted to showcase the differences between Magic Flute. His most popular opera is number 4 in that survey that I mentioned earlier, with Clemenza di Tito, which is sometimes referred to as his most reviled opera, and to showcase Mozart's range.
do you like this Tito?
Oh,
See, I was going to say.
oh, I think it's an absolute masterpiece.
Yeah.
Yeah. The only strike I have against it is that he didn't write the secco recitatives.
Did that happen often, the farming out?
No, I
was gonna say.
It's very unique in that regard.
So for someone who's not very sophisticated about music, would we hear that?
Oh, that was not Mozart's hand. That, well, I think it is just very difficult to perform. It took the singer some time to make the setting sound grand. In some ways,
tried to cover it.
Yes, exactly.
It feels smooth
It's-
once they've done their work.
The burden is on the singers to make it sound natural, to make it sound Mozartian, but it doesn't come so naturally. Whereas a secco recitative by Mozart just rolls off the tongue beautifully.
So is that because of the word choice?
It has to do with knowing the speech patterns, and knowing where you would lengthen certain syllables, raise pitch certain areas. Mozart just knew the language that way, whereas there's some counterintuitive elements to this setting. Yes?
Any places that you think Mozart copied his other pieces there, at least passages?
Well, with Mozart, there's always going to be melodies that sound like some of his other works, because he worked within a certain pool of stock musical gestures, whether it's jumping up an octave and then coming back down the scale. Those kinds of figures you can find all over his repertoire. What's remarkable about what he does is how he develops those small ideas and spins it out into a more sophisticated texture. So there are seeds in this music that you would identify as being in other parts of his opus.
How do you've made such a compelling case for its excellence. How do you explain someone like Charles Rosen's antipathy? Or did he not look at it closely enough, or was he biased in some way, or how do you explain it?
That is a good question. I think that he was biased just by virtue of it being an opera seria, and may not have given it its due, and might not have looked into the way Mozart characterizes his musical ideas to reflect the psychology of the characters. I think that's a really critical aspect of appreciating this music, because in terms of plot, not a whole lot happens aside from the first act when the Capitol burns down. Aside from that, it's a whole lot of, should I do this? Should I not? Should I forgive these people? Should I not? And it goes on for 2.5 hours. And so in that aspect, I think it might have been just attention deficit. Yes.
Okay, I thought Mozart did write really fast. I mean, 18 days is very short.
Yeah.
But how long did it take you to do Magic Flute, for example?
Magic Flute.
I mean,
he finished Magic Flute in September, and I think he began it in July.
I mean, didn't he write
Yeah.
fast
Yeah.
as compared to other, I mean, 18 days sounds very fast.
Yeah. I know that Don Giovanni, I think he spent 4 months writing. So the fact that he's able to do that is amazing, and he was desperate to fulfill this commission because of the prestige of it, and also he was flat broke at the time too. It was not being a freelance musician in Vienna was not so easy at this time. Yeah.
Could it be the modern ear would hear this differently than from his contemporaries?
Modern ears, like our ears, would we
Yeah,
appreciate it in a different way?
They had heard 40 Clemenza de Titos.
Oh, sure, yeah. It's hard to know how this work might have rung for contemporary audiences. I think for us, for people who are familiar with Mozart's work, it really distinctly sounds like music that he wrote at the very end of his career. And I think to contemporary audiences at the time in 1791, they probably missed the sort of effervescent quality of Mozart's music that characterizes his comedic works, and that might be also part of why they found it to be dull in comparison to some of his comedic works. It is serious, it is dark, and that may have gone over as well.
I have one other thing.
Yeah.
Would it be fair to say, based on what you said, major concern or theme in this piece is ambivalence?
On
So to
the
speak.
part of the audience, you mean, or?
On the part of, is he going to commit the murder, or is he
Story,
not
the
going to
story.
commit the
Oh.
murder? Yeah, so my question is, didn't Mozart have a very ambivalent attitude about authority and about patrons and so forth? I mean, how far would you push the biographical interpretation? Because it's done all the time with his other pieces.
Sure. So, one might think that he was eager to set this piece to music in order to have an opportunity to portray a ruler who rules with kindness and compassion, and in some senses that's an opportunity to write a piece that's didactic for his patron. That might be a part of it as well. It's something that's fascinating. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.